Putin to lose 15,000 troops as army forced to surrender. Ukrainian counteroffensives have caught Russian forces unawares as they are unable to retreat to safety. There are no good options for Russia as tens of thousands of their soldiers appear stranded in the south without any means of crossing back into safe territory, an expert has claimed. Ed Arnold, former British Army and NATO officer, told Sky News that Russia desperately needs to move to the east of the Dnipro River, into a Russian stronghold, as Ukraine advances on Kherson, but that such a move, given the number of troops stranded, is going to be a real issue. He reported that roughly 15,000 soldiers are currently stuck on the western side of the river and look likely to be forced into a surrender. Mr. Arnold said, "The issue that the Russians have is that when militaries have to withdraw under this type of pressure, they need good commanders to rally, which they do not have. And also the ground has no natural barriers to reset their front lines, as it were. So, Ukraine is really trying to push and there are no good options for the Russians. They can either collapse back to Kherson and use the safety that the city will provide. But, ultimately, they need to move to the east of the river. It is roughly 15,000 Russian soldiers that are on the western side, and that is going to be a real issue. It is likely that they are going to be forced into a surrender to the Ukrainian armed forces. Ukraine has been carrying out a huge number of rapid counteroffensives over the last 6 weeks, forcing Russian forces to retreat towards the border. Putin's soldiers had been enjoying a reasonable degree of success, surrounding cities such as Severodonetsk and advancing on Luhansk in the Donetsk region. Putin last week formally annexed 4 areas that had partially succumbed to Russia's invasion in a bid to use legal measures to secure those territories. Experts warned that such measures would allow Putin, in his own mind, to use nuclear blackmail, whereby if he believed these Ukrainian territories now belonged to Russia, he would feel authorized to use weapons of mass destruction to protect them. But Ukrainians have not heeded this warning and have swiftly advanced in several areas in the 4 regions. In the last week, the towns of Novovoskres, Ukraine is now moving further into the annexed areas and surrounding Russian forces, who appear unable to retreat, let alone fight back. The UN General Assembly is also set to vote on discrediting the legitimacy of the annexations, further damaging Russian strongholds, although such a move would have been expected by Putin. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed pro-Moscow forces in the annexed regions on Wednesday night, telling them they had already lost. Switching mid-speech from Ukrainian to Russian, Mr. Zelensky suggested that more citizens of Russia are now realizing they must die in the face of the counteroffensives if Putin does not cede territory. He said, "Ukrainians know what they are fighting for. And more citizens of Russia are realizing that they must die simply because one person does not want to end the war." The next few weeks could prove costly for Russian forces if they are unable to evacuate the stranded troops. The loss of Kherson, in addition, as a strategic crossing point for Russian soldiers, will also make it harder to replace those that surrender. Putin's forces tip to face deadly battle as Ukraine has chanced to take Kherson. As Ukrainian forces take territory little by little in the east, a major battle for Kherson could be on the horizon. This week, it has been claimed that a Russian soldier was shot as he tried to surrender to Ukrainian troops. A Ukrainian soldier recalled the moment as his country continued with its counteroffensive. Alexei, a 20-year-old from a village near Luhansk whose name was changed for his safety. The eastern region of Ukraine has been under fire since 2014, when Russia made its first foray into the country. Speaking to the Telegraph, Alexei said, "One of them fell to the ground at the sight of us and shouted, 'Just don't kill please, I want to live.' His guys started shooting from behind his back, hitting him." The incident happened near the southern city of Kherson, a key region that was first occupied by Russia in March and has now been annexed. But while Russian President Vladimir Putin celebrates the territorial grabs, an expert believes Ukraine could have the chance to strike back. Natalia Gumenyuk, a Ukrainian journalist, spoke to the Globalist Monocle 24 podcast about Ukraine's potential opportunity to liberate areas near Kherson. She said, "What we understand is that it is still possible for Ukraine to liberate villages in the south. Here Ukraine is divided by the Dnipro River, there is the left bank where the Donbas is, which is closer to Russia, but there are big opportunities that Russia could be encircled on the right bank. This is where the city of Kherson is, that is the city which is the only regional capital to be occupied after the invasion. Months ago, what I understand is that it is more difficult for the Ukrainian army, there are more Russian troops that are better prepared. But the Ukrainians still, little by little, village by village, town by town, are taking territory. The chances that the right bank can be liberated are there. It won't be fast, but it is just more deadly, including for the Russian troops. Should the Russian military lose Kherson, it would represent yet another blow in their invasion of Ukraine. In September, Moscow's men lost huge amounts of territory near Kharkiv in the northeast. This appears to be what has provoked Putin's partial mobilization as well as the annexation of Ukrainian territory. But military setbacks have also caused increasing division within the Kremlin. Russia's defense minister, General Sergei Shoigu, was told to shoot himself by one of his colleagues this week. Kirill Stremousov, who was appointed by the Kremlin as the head of Kherson, spoke after Ukraine reported yet more territorial gains. He said, "A lot of people say that the defense minister, as an officer who let that happen, could shoot himself. But you know what, the word officer is not familiar for some people." Mr. Stremousov added that Kherson is safe under lock and key but lamented useless and corrupt generals and looters who make up the Russian military. With Russia now openly discussing its military failings, many experts fear Putin could turn to nuclear weapons to save face. U.S. President Joe Biden echoed this, saying the risk of nuclear Armageddon was at its highest level since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Speaking on Thursday, he said that Putin is a guy I know fairly well and warned that he was not joking when he talks about the use of tactical nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons. The U.S. president argued that Putin's threats are genuine because his military is significantly underperforming. Kremlin mocked for poor battle discipline as Ukraine captures more than 1,000 vehicles. Ukraine is thought to have captured more than 440 Russian main battle tanks, and around 650 other armored vehicles since the invasion began on February 24, 2022. The UK, hitting out at the Russian army's tactics, the MOD said, the failure of Russian crews to destroy intact equipment before withdrawing or surrendering highlights their poor state of training and low levels of battle discipline. It warned, with Russian formations under severe strain in several sectors and increasingly demoralized troops, Russia will likely continue to lose heavy weaponry. This comes as Putin's war effort appears to be stalling, with Volodymyr Zelensky's army having retaken more than 6,000 square kilometers of land since the start of September, according to the Institute for the Study of War, ISW. The ISW said Russian forces are facing a major operational defeat. Meanwhile, the U.S. Defense Department estimated that at least 80,000 Russian troops have been killed or wounded since the Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine began on February 24, 2022. However, Tobias Ellwood, chair of the House of Commons Defense Select Committee, warned that Putin's humiliation in Ukraine raises the prospect of nuclear strikes in areas which he now claims are Russian territory. He called for a robust, international, conventional, military response in order to avoid a dangerous precedent. Mr. Ellwood added, Putin has long exploited the West's weakness to challenge his military advances directly. It's time to spell out now the consequences, rather than hope it won't happen. Earlier today, weapons expert Hamish de Bretton-Gordon told Express.co.uk that Putin is showing signs of pure desperation, as his war effort appears to be grinding to a halt. He said Putin's deck of cards is looking pretty wobbly, adding that the Russian president is beginning to look very stupid. This comes after the Russian leader announced partial mobilization on September 21, the first mobilization of Russian forces since World War II. Mr. de Bretton-Gordon described this as a sign of pure desperation, explaining, "You supposedly have the most powerful army in the world, that is being degraded to a point where you're dragging young men off the streets." The weapons expert explained that Putin has been pushed to this point, which he described as a tipping point, partly as a result of all the training and weapons provided to the Ukrainian army by British and American forces. He told Express.co.uk, "I think we're seeing that all the training and advice we've given the Ukraine military is now paying dividends.